The Sony A6400 was released over 6 months ago, and it has quickly turned into one of my most used cameras of all time. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and while this is still my favorite camera, there are some legitimate issues that might keep it from being your favorite camera. In all fairness, it's not a very flashy camera, and looking at it from a technical standpoint, it's kinda dull. But after 6 months, what are the features that I really like, and the issues that I have that I really don't like? Let's find out. What's up everyone, I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. We're gonna keep this as short and simple as possible. Now I've already made several videos covering this little camera, so I don't really want to retread old ground, but one of the problems is a lot of what I liked in the past are things that I still continue to really appreciate. We're also not gonna cover a single ounce of specs, so if you'd like to see a more in-depth series of videos on tips, tricks, comparisons of this and other popular cameras, and overall features, there will be a playlist linked in the description below with like 10 or more videos that will set you straight. I like talking about this camera. And really quickly before we get started, let's throw this up on the sticks to be the B camera for the rest of the video. There we go, Sony APS-C goodness. So let's start off the video proper with the things that I don't like. Now we all have different needs in a camera, and while this again is my favorite camera of the year, it might not be yours because honestly there are a few big negatives, and some of these could be legitimate deal breakers. Now the very worst one in my opinion is the battery life. It's bad. Real bad. I mean, you can basically watch it drain in real time as you were using the camera. Even when you're just like messing around with it, you're playing around with it, you're messing with the settings, I mean, it will drain at an alarming rate. Now, just in this video, I've had this recording for a minute now, and we've already lost like a whole percentage point. And don't even get me started about how long, when you actually start recording, it gets worse. And let's say you don't buy the OEM Sony batteries and you use third-party ones like I do, it's even worse. I mean, like maybe 45 minutes of 4K recording if you are lucky, and maybe an hour or a little more than an hour if you use the standard ones. This is a problem born out of these summer newer advances that we'll talk about in the things I really like. Each of the additional good features comes at a cost of either heat, battery life, size, or some combination of the three. And we all know that Sony wants the smallest bodies possible, so we do kind of have to suffer with these battery life problems. I mean, you can't beat physics. The second potential deal breaker is the rolling shutter. Now, almost every single consumer level hybrid camera on the market has some kind of rolling shutter to varying degrees. And really quickly, for those that don't know what I'm talking about, the camera, like any digital camera, can only read their entire sensor so fast. Some read faster, some read slower. The slower it reads, the more warping happens in the issue. The GH5 is really good with rolling shutter. The A6400, not as good, and you can probably see that with the hands here. And another example, these planks are actually not bent. It's a fence, it's a normal fence, but the rolling shutter makes it look like they're all wobbly. Now, why this is especially bad for a camera like the A6400 is in 4K, it's noticeable even in handheld clips. So if you're like using this to vlog and you're moving around a whole bunch, everything will kind of look wobbly. So you don't want to do too many movements. Now, it's not as bad in 1080p, but if I'm spending the money on a 4K camera, I'm probably going to want to record in 4K. Unless it's like the EOS R that has 1080p that is, it's really good. And the third hot ticket potential deal breaker, and yeah, I used that phrasing on purpose, is heating issues. The A6400 though is vastly better than any of the other A6000 style cameras that Sony's ever released. And I've personally never had a big issue when doing stuff like this indoors. I've done hours long live streams without the heating icon turning on at all, which is very impressive. My A6300 used to shut off all the time while live streaming with it. But having just gone through one of the worst July heat waves of recent memory, I mean, I did have some issues with the heating icon showing up more than I'm comfortable with while I'm outside. Now, that's not to say the camera ever shut off on me, because it didn't, but knowing and seeing the little heat icon, I mean, when that shows up, that starts making me skittish, because the last thing I want is to be in the middle of some really awesome take, you know, getting something beautiful or just being funny, because I'm not very funny and I have to get it when I can get it. But I don't want to lose all that because the camera's overheated. So the second that little icon pops up, I get nervous. Cameras in general, some of them have overheating problems. I mean, that's just the nature of having an enclosure over a heat generating machine, and shoving a huge sensor into a tiny body makes this issue worse than it probably needs to be for the A6400. A little bit of a body redesign would lend itself to a vastly more useful camera. I'm willing to have a little bit bigger body for a better battery, better overheating. It's like it all ties together. There are other small things that I wish were different, like I wish it had the extra custom button like on the A6500 body. I wish the touchscreen was actually fully touch enabled for menus, and I also wish it had bigger than micro HDMI. Micro HDMI is literally the worst connection ever. At least have mini. And I also kind of wish it had in-body image stabilization. But those are all small things that honestly really don't sway me away from the camera. Okay, we just spent 800 words saying that it's not a perfect camera. Now I want you to remember this when we go to the next part, because I'm trying to be as unbiased as possible. And I effing love this camera, so that's it's kind of hard. I'm doing my best. Now that we got the crap out of the way, let's talk about the things that I really love, and some of these are absolutely purchase-making decisions because nothing else in the market can really do what this camera can do. Let's start off with the single most useful feature in the A6400, and yes, as we've established in a previous video, I am a young, hip, attractive millennial, so I need to see myself all the time with some kind of a flip screen. Yes, the flip-up screen. When the camera was first released, I really thought I was gonna hate this because it flips up and not out. And as we've heard so many times that because it flips up, you will lose the ability to have a microphone on this camera. Well, to combat this, I personally use the Rode Wireless Go on top because you still, I mean, it is blocking a little bit of the screen, but you still will have most of the real estate and you still have most of the screen to see. And there are even better features that we'll talk about in a second that make this even more usable. And there are even cheap adapters like I'm using right now that will let you offset the hot shoe mount. So now I install the Rode Wireless Go to the side, works even better. But why the screen is the most important is obvious to those of us that make these kind of videos, because you can frame yourself, you can ensure proper exposure. I mean, this one feature makes this the most useful Sony camera ever released. And yes, I know the A5100 has it, but it overheats way faster. I hate that when you use the 4K mode on a Sony camera and then you plug it into a monitor, you lose the face tracking ability. I mean, that really sucks. The genius here is you can use 4K without needing that monitor. It's like the first Sony camera that unlocks its full potential for us online creators. And you can do that without too much hassle. Now, in all fairness, it's not the only one, because as of now, the A7R4 will do 4K 24 frames per second with face tracking while plugged into a monitor. I found that out by talking to a Sony engineer. They know things. Plus, once you set the screen to daylight, you can see it in the daylight. One of the problems with a flip screen is if it's too dim to see outdoors, what does it actually do? Here, it's bright, it's beautiful, it's so easy to see. One of the things that this monitor also gets really right is the A7 III and the RX100 Mark VII both have screens that don't play well with polarized sunglasses. Well, this screen plays great with polarized sunglasses. You should still get a screen protector to keep it from getting scratched up because you don't want to damage your nice camera gear. Even people like me that drop their stuff all the time don't want to ruin their nice camera gear. Something else that I really like about the A6400 that has nothing to do with the flip-up monitor is the internal preamps on this camera are legit. You don't need to worry about fiddling around with too many other audio devices because the A6400 can record very nice, usable audio internal to the camera. And this is such an underappreciated feature because audio is by far more important than video. Panasonic menu system, way more than I like even the new Sony system. I mean, it's very intuitively laid out. The A6400 also has quite possibly the best autofocus system I've ever seen. Now, Canon used to be on top with their dual pixel autofocus, but they developed it and then stopped progressing. And Sony was like, hey, you know what? We want to fight and succeed and win in this territory. And they do, because this camera is rock solid, easily the best I've used. Now, something I do though, to make it a little easier on the camera, especially if you're using a really fast prime lens, you set the tracking to face priority, and then you set the autofocus mode to zone, and if your face is in that zone, it will be in focus. Now, it doesn't have the eye detect autofocus in video like the RX100 Mark VII or the A7R4, but honestly, I mean, for stills, that's probably pretty important. However, here in real camera use land, also known as video land, face priority that works is all you will ever need. Which brings us to the final but probably most important thing for the camera to get right for the majority of people. Image quality. The image quality on this camera is phenomenal. Like, I recommend this to people over the A7 III easily because it has the same image quality. I mean, sensor size differences aside, it looks fantastic. Now, just like Sony's other APS-C cameras, this actually has a 6K sensor, and the camera downsamples that internally to 4K. But what does that actually mean? Much like rolling shutter, like, who cares? What does downsampling mean? Basically, it fits 6K worth of information into a 4K resolution size, which means you will get better looking 4K because it's got 6K worth of information in it. It looks great. Plus, unlike Canon's new attempts at DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, this will do all of the resolution their previous cameras can do. Like, if you want 24 frames per second, this will do 24 frames per second. I mean, who knew that in almost the fall of 2019, we'd be concerned that our cameras might not be able to do basic functions that the older generation used to be able to do? Weird that, but it has all the same frame rates of all the previous cameras that you could want. The image quality is stunning, and the auto modes make even those of us not confident with the scary M dial to be able to capture great quality video. Whew. 6 months later, and I've drafted a 1700 worded love letter to the A6400. It's still a beast. You can find these used online for about $700, making it easily the best value camera on the market for the online content creator. You can get one of these used, get a couple of those basic Sigma prime lenses, and you are good to go. Now, it might not be the flashiest camera released this year. That probably goes to Fuji. But darn it, the most useful doesn't mean that it has to be the flashiest. Hey, that's like me. I'm not the flashiest either. Camera, weird. I get you, A6400. Thanks for watching.